Yo, what is up guys, Ghost here, and today I want to offer you a few tips and tricks on using the helicopters in Battlefield 6. We've recently seen the scout helicopters release, and overall the helis have seen some pretty big improvements, so I feel like it's finally time to make a guide on this and they're actually worth using now. So if you're somebody who tried flying a helicopter, instantly crashed into the ground, and never managed to get the hang of it, I'm going to be breaking down all the controls, my key bindings and sensitivities, and then I'll move on to the core aspects of flying the helicopter and controlling your momentum that are key to being a successful pilot. These should be very beginner friendly as well, so if you don't have any prior experience, don't worry, you'll be in good hands. Now before we get started, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There will be additional tutorials coming in the future, and that is the best way to make sure that you don't miss any. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll begin with the key bindings and sensitivities, and then we'll move into the test range and go over all the aspects of flying the helicopter in order to make it do exactly what you want it to do, right? So you have a nice smooth experience, and it sort of becomes a bit like riding a bicycle or driving a car. Okay, so here we are. You want to go up to the settings, and we're going to begin first of all with the HUD section. There are a couple of settings here that I recommend making sure you have turned on. So first of all, SOVIS filter, the soldier visibility filter. This is actually going to be a really big asset when you're in the helicopters. It's going to allow you to see soldiers running around on the ground far easier than if you have it turned off, and it's also great for infantry play, so you've probably already got this on. Then we come down to the minimap. I recommend having this as large, and then when it comes to view distance in air, you want to put this to 1000 or the maximum, just so that you can see enemy vehicles as far away as possible. Moving on to the mouse and keyboard section, but obviously if you're on controller, then you can do this in the controller section. I do play on PC, so I am going to be talking about my mouse sensitivity, but really it is personal preference anyway, so if you're on controller, you can also dial in your own sensitivity there. So moving down to the vehicle section, I use an overall sensitivity of 20, but obviously this one is going to affect all of the vehicles, and just for reference here, I use 1600 DPI on my mouse, so if you want to use that and copy my settings, feel free. Otherwise, you can also just use your own. Then we come down to the control settings here. So first of all, invert vertical flight. This is personal preference. For me, this has always made sense in aircraft. You know, if you've got a joystick in a jet, if you push it forwards, the nose is going to go down, and if you pull it back, the nose is going to go up. That's just what makes sense to me, and so if that makes sense to you, you probably want it inverted. If you're not used to it inverted, then maybe you want to leave this off, but at least I fly with things inverted. When it comes to the helicopter sensitivity, again, you know, this is personal preference, but if you want to copy this, this is what I use, 140. Helicopter control assists, you definitely want as off. What this will do is basically help you in some way fly the helicopter, but it comes, as it says here, at the cost of maneuverability, which is terrible. So if we want to learn to do this, we may as well learn to do it the right way first time. Coming down to the aim section, I do use uniform vehicle aiming. I recommend using this if you use uniform soldier aiming. This is the value I use there. Again, if you want to copy it, feel free. A little bit further down here, we have the sensitivities. You definitely want to make sure that third-person field of view is up at the maximum here. This is just going to give you the greatest field of view when you're in third person. You're going to be able to see enemy helis approaching a little bit better and all of that good stuff. Vehicle weapon zoom, you can have this on a toggle if you like. I like to do that mainly for tanking. In fact, I wish these were split, because sometimes I want my weapon zoom to be a hold, like in the jets, but unfortunately, there's only one option in the game that goes across all of the vehicles. So for that reason, I've got it as a toggle. You can do whichever you prefer there. Okay, let's back out of there, and now we're going to go into helicopter pilot keybinds. There's not too many things I change in here. One of them is exit vehicle. This will be put as E as default, and that is a pretty awkward keybind because you can very easily hit it by accident, and that can be quite embarrassing. So for that reason, I bind it to B because I don't really need to hit this quickly most of the time. I also put my big map on tab, so that is normally the scoreboard, and then instead I put the scoreboard on M, big map on tab. This just allows me to bring up the map, get a good overview of the battlefield, see where the enemy vehicles are, etc. See what the flag status is and all that good stuff. So definitely recommend that one. Now, there is such a thing as rifle aim, and I don't use rifle aim just because I've flown helicopters in Battlefield games the conventional way for decades at this point. So I'm not going to change things now, but if you do want to do rifle aim, I'm not going to spend much time focusing on that particular aspect of flying helis in this tutorial because it really deserves its own video. But what you would want to do is put the yaw here on left and right on the mouse. So you just click on these and put left and right on the mouse. And then like here we have roll on the mouse. You would delete those and you would put D here on roll right and then A on roll left. You're basically just switching the roll and the yaw. But this is what I use. So I would recommend at least beginning to learn, just use the defaults here. Other than that, there are a couple others. I like to put free look on one of the side buttons on my mouse. I find that V is a bit of an awkward key because if you put your hand on the keyboard and you've got your index finger on the D key, as soon as you shift it over to V, you kind of lose that whole pattern, you lose that whole setup on the ASDW keys there, which you really need to be using all the time in a helicopter. So it's better, in my opinion, to just hold a side button on the mouse and then use the mouse to look around, and as soon as you release the button, it just snaps back. Then I also like to go and put equipment slot 1 on X. This is just an old habit. These are going to be your countermeasures, and I do this for every vehicle in the game. I do it for the jets, I do it for the smoke in the tank or the APS or whatever. It's just a force of habit. I've always used X for this, and I'm not about to stop nowadays. So, you know, if you've only played Battlefield 6 and this is your first game, you might just want to keep that as the 3 key, but for me, I like to put it as X. And then one final setting here for you guys, coming into graphics quality settings. If you have these, come in here, go to mesh quality and put this on at least medium. Really the higher the better, but I find that like high is totally fine. This is going to make it so that you'll see things popping up a little bit closer in game, you know. Otherwise, you're going to have instances where a pylon will just appear out of nowhere as you're flying because the mesh quality is set to low, and that can of course cause you to crash and die. So definitely recommend having this one on at least medium, if not high or even ultra. Okay, so here we are in the test range. This will be linked down in the description. You can just boot this up yourself and host it in Portal. I really recommend practicing in one of these because it's quite hard to actually get your hands on a helicopter in Battlefield 6, so when you do, you actually want to be decent enough to be able to use it. So we're going to start off super simple here. I put a mouse and keyboard on screen so you guys can see this as well. We're just going to start off with the basic controls. So if you press W, this is going to cause you to basically gain thrust in the rotor, right? S is going to decrease that thrust, but what you really need to take care of is you are going to go in the direction that your rotor is facing. So if we're completely level, we're just going to go up and down like this. If we go off to the side though and we hold W, well, now we're going to start going in the direction of the top of the rotor, which is wherever we're pointing it. Now, you're also going to see me using A and D, which is our yaw. It's quite sensitive in Battlefield 6, and bear in mind, your in-game sensitivities don't actually have any effect on this. It's only really your mouse hand that the sensitivities are affecting here, which is why sensitivity actually doesn't matter as much as it does for, let's say, infantry play. Now, speaking of the mouse hand, if we go left and right here, that is going to be our roll, and then forwards and back is going to allow us to pitch up and backwards. And flying the helicopter is going to be a combination of all of these three things, right? Thrust, yaw, and then rolling the helicopter around with the mouse. You're always going to be using all three of these inputs to some degree. So I really recommend practicing them and getting good at the feel for them and just what they do exactly. Now, that's all well and good, but how do you actually transition those different movements and make the helicopter do what you want it to do? Well, first of all, let's talk about gaining altitude and losing altitude, because you may have noticed that this right here, just holding W and holding S, doesn't really do things very quickly for you. And if you transition it the other way, so now we want to go down and then you want to thrust upwards, it takes quite a long time to actually start gaining that thrust up again. So what this means is that your altitude is actually very precious to you. Now, let's say you're up at a height like this and you want to lose altitude quickly. You could just hold S and, you know, that will work. But one of the quicker ways to do it is actually just like flipping your helicopter over like that whilst holding S. And can you see how much quicker I got down to the ground? This is incredibly important. For example, if you've used your flares because you got locked on, well, now you either need to get down to the ground and you need to hug the ground, because under a certain altitude that will activate under radar, and under radar means you can't get locked on. Or you may want to, if you have the ability to do so, maybe there's this wall over here, maybe you want to like get down behind this wall, right, so that you can't be locked on because the enemy doesn't have line of sight to you. So a lot of the time you will be wanting to use that maneuver in order to bleed all of your altitude very quickly. So one of the things you're going to want to learn how to do, in my opinion, straight away is how to strafe around a target like this, but keep your aim trained on him. And if you look at my controls, you can sort of see what I'm doing, right? I'm using the upward thrust of the helicopter to not just keep my altitude, but also move to the right. And then I'm at the same time using yaw in the opposite direction, so on the A key to the left, to sort of keep the helicopter in check, whilst also using my mouse hand a little bit to just train my aim on this infantry soldier. And this is really important because a lot of, you know, noob pilots or beginner pilots, let's say, they'll sort of see a target like this and then they get a little bit fixated and they're like, oh, let me just try and take this guy down. Then they drift down like that, and that's when you get RPG'd. So you need to be strafing around your targets. Like, you don't want to get too close to these guys because you're going to give them much easier of a shot, right? If you're constantly moving like this, you're going to be a lot harder to take out as a helicopter pilot. Now, even this is a bit predictable, right? Sooner or later, an engineer is going to realize, okay, he's just going in circles, so I can just sort of predict that. So, you know, flick back and reverse things. That's also a valid tactic. Something else you sometimes see pilots do is sort of, they'll like be aiming and then swinging the helicopter sort of like a pendulum from left to right. And that way the engineer never really knows when you're going to swing. Now, another really core pillar of helicopter gameplay is using your momentum. So whichever way you're pushing the helicopter, it's going to sort of continue going in that direction, but sometimes you can use it to your advantage, right? And that's what you really want to try and do. So let's say you come in a bit too close to these infantry, you're like, oh no, you can actually back up like that, and now I'm actually moving away from them, even though I've stopped like touching the helicopter controls at all, because of that momentum. So you can sort of like flick around like that, turn your rotors back to generate some backwards momentum, and then you can just like aim in on these guys whilst you're moving away from them and maybe score a couple of kills. That sort of thing can be incredibly powerful as well. And once you get used to this sort of movement, you won't really ever have to think about it. It's a little bit like riding a bicycle or driving a car. You'll just do the right input for the helicopter and get the right outcomes. So one little tip on sensitivity here, you're going to notice that like most of me actually lining up my aim on these guys is done on the left hand, on the keys that aren't really affected by sensitivity. If you want to change your yaw, which is kind of going to allow you to fine-tune your aim this way, a good way to do it is just like, you can just tap it like that, right? And that's going to make things move a little bit slower. The right hand is only really used to tweak your aim, like especially when it comes to the pitch, obviously the up and down planes. So dialing in your sensitivity really just comes down to that. If you feel like things are a little bit too floaty, maybe you want to turn your sensitivity down, but because most of the control is done on the left hand, I would recommend starting with a lower sensitivity and then turning it up as you need it, because after all, you also need it to be high enough so that you can pull off the maneuvers that you need to. For example, you know, if you want to be able to roll the helicopter over like this to bleed some altitude, you also need to be able to do that relatively quickly, and if your sensitivity is far too low, then you're not going to be able to do that. So we've done a lot of hovering around and just kind of making sure you don't get RPG'd by engineers and stuff like that, but how about accelerating and decelerating quickly? Well, in the helicopters, like I said before, your altitude is, you should think of it as a resource that you can use to accelerate quickly. Because you'll see if I just tilt the helicopter forward, look at the bottom left there, how many knots we're doing, and it's getting up to like 110 now, but it's going up pretty slow, right? And eventually you'll reach the maximum speed, which I think is 121, at least if you're going on that plane. But if you've got a bunch of altitude, and you just kind of swoop down like this, look at the knots now. Like, we're already up to 133, and it went up so much quicker. So you can really generate a lot of speed by swooping down very quickly and sacrificing your altitude. And often the best way to do it is like roll into the dive like that. You also want to make sure that you pull up with your right hand before you hit the ground, because that would be quite embarrassing. But that's kind of how you speed away, and that can be very important when it comes to line of sighting lock-ons and you need to get behind a wall or whatever. Similarly, if you're going really, really fast and then you need to like brake, instead of just like pulling the helicopter up like this, what that's going to do then, it's going to turn that speed into upwards momentum. And now you may get locked on, right? So if you want to stay close to the ground, but you want to come to a halt sort of thing, let's say we want to stop when we get past that green wall there. What you can do is just flick the helicopter around like that. And by flicking it around, you put the thrust in the opposite direction from which you were coming, and you sort of cancel out that momentum. So once again, everything in the helicopter comes down to making use of the momentum. I really recommend actually using these boxes in this particular test range here to teach you about momentum, because like once you've got the momentum in that direction, you can just sort of like float through these. Like once you're going the right way, then all you need to do with the controls is maybe just like tuck in your tail and make sure that you're not gonna like hit anything. And whilst this one may not have any similar areas in the game, you can also practice in these ones where you can like go and dive down these things, and then practice maybe like pulling up there and bleeding some of your speed off and stuff like that. But I can guarantee you, if you just spend a while messing around, going in and out of these cubes or these diamonds or whatever you want to call them, you will get pretty good at controlling your roll, your yaw, and your thrust. Now, this tutorial's gotten pretty long here, so there are other things I want to mention, like heli 1 versus 1s and how to dodge lock-ons and target prioritization and stuff like that. So let me know down below if you want some more tutorials and if you found this useful. But just to wrap up here, let's talk a little bit about the best loadouts. Right now, I'm using the grenade launcher. It's really more of an explosive cannon. You know, grenade launcher is a little bit misleading. And then we're using the standard rockets, the dumbfire rockets, not the guided one, because these are just honestly completely overpowered. You see these guys there? 2 rockets, guys. You just click once or pull the trigger once and 2 rockets will fire, and that is enough to kill any infantry. They've got pretty crazy splash damage as well, so sometimes you can even get 2 kills. These are bar none the most powerful thing in all of Battlefield 6 right now, so I really recommend taking those. As for the aiming with them, you kind of want to use the middle of this little eye icon here. That is generally where they're going to hit, and you can also tell that they are affected by your momentum. So these are really, really good for sort of sweeping or swooping in and getting a couple of splash kills or multi-kills on a big cluster of infantry, especially when there's a lot of targets, a lot of engineers, and you want to do it fairly safely. Then we've got the grenade launcher, and it takes quite a while to kill infantry, but you can see it's still pretty powerful, right? Like, you can two-shot them, you still have to be fairly accurate though, but at the same time, I think for newer players, it's, you know, quite an easy weapon to get used to, right? Because you do have that splash damage, and so it's going to afford you a few more aiming mistakes than if you're using something like the main cannons. Furthermore, you can also do damage to vehicles, so it basically means you can take out really anything with this vehicle. And actually, strafing around a tank like this is really, really good practice at just keeping your aim trained on something, keep strafing around it, and it does take a little bit of time. But you can see you can actually solo tanks with that as well, and if you strafe around them like that, they will really not be able to do anything because their turret turns too slowly. Now, the weakness of this setup is going to be against helicopters. Really, the enemy scout helicopter and even the attack helicopter will really be the only vehicles or things in the game that will kill you extremely fast. But you do have your rockets. The rockets are super powerful. And, you know, you can hit vehicles with them from very, very far distances, even though it looks like you can't. And one full salvo of these is enough to take down a scout helicopter, an attack helicopter, maybe not the transport helicopter here, but Yeah, I kind of missed there. But you guys get the point, right? You can also hit vehicles with the grenade launcher. It's just that you have to be pretty close. And for some reason, on this particular test range, you can see my aim is like really bugging out here. I think I'm still sort of aiming okay, but it's almost like some weird lag that we're experiencing. But those also do a lot of damage to air vehicles, these grenade launcher cannons here. And they are capable of shooting out the pilots and doing damage to the infantry inside. So whilst I wouldn't say that they're necessarily the best for everything in the helicopter, I think they're a really beginner-friendly choice here. Okay, just a couple of things I wanted to add here on the loadout front. So as I mentioned before, grenade launcher, heavy rotary MG is probably going to be like the meta weapon, the best one if your aim is good enough. It's a lot harder to kill infantry with it. It's harder to hit like vehicles and stuff like that. But if your aim is cracked, then it can be really, really amazing. It's also got more range than a grenade launcher. So overall, this is going to be the weapon of choice for like the best scout helicopter pilots, and honestly they will probably shred you with this if you have the grenade launcher. But most pilots that you run into in a public lobby are just not very good in scout helicopters, so it really depends on that. I wouldn't recommend taking the minigun because it just doesn't have the range of the 50 cal, the rotary MG cannon here. It does have a lot of DPS, but you just have to be so much closer, and it's not really used much at all right now. As for the secondaries, light rockets are the way to go. The aim guided, they simply are nowhere near as good. I would never take these in any situation over the light rockets because, as I mentioned before, light rockets are just insane. Flares, you can't change those. Motion sensor or smoke launcher, both of these are kind of bad, to be honest. Like, it doesn't really matter which one you go for. The smoke launcher is going to drop smoke. It's going to help you clear spots. The motion sensor allows you to spot the enemy. That's going to help you get a few more kills there, so that's the one I choose, but you can really take whatever you want. This is really the big one, the upgrade slot. So the emergency stabilizer reduces the effect of mobility hits, making it easier to stay in control of the vehicle. This one, in my opinion, gives you the most survivability because sometimes when you get mobility hit, maybe from an AA cannon, maybe from a lock-on that you weren't able to avoid, this is going to save your ass because it is very easy to crash into the ground from a mobility hit and die, even with this, never mind without it. The other options, though, you do have tactical data system, which is basically just going to spot everything that your gunner spots for you. If you happen to have a gunner with this thermal imaging camera, it's going to spot it for your team as well as you. So if you're a team player, I guess you could pick that. Then you've got the engine upgrade. It's going to give you faster top speed and acceleration, but it's going to come at the cost of maneuverability. So I'm not a big fan of that trade-off. I used to play with this, then I went back to stabilizer again, but feel free to try it out if you want. And then finally, we have targeting interference, which is basically just going to slow down the lock-on speed of enemy engineers and enemy vehicles and whatnot. It's not going to stop them locking on though, right? They're still going to get the lock on eventually. So for that reason, I just prefer to go with the emergency stabilizer, but interference and engine upgrade aren't really bad choices either. So there we go, guys. Hopefully you found this useful. There were a few key takeaways of at least how I approach flying helicopters in Battlefield 6. Those are the main things that I try to think about. I'm not the best helicopter pilot by any stretch of the imagination. You guys know me, I'm more of a jack-of-all-trades player, but I have used aircraft in Battlefield games for some time, and I do often get comments of people asking me for my settings and if I'll make a video like this, so here you go. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, leaving a like down below is always appreciated. Don't forget to subscribe as well. Maybe there'll be some more tutorials like this one in the future if this one is successful enough. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.